Hello, I'm Anthony. I've been wallowing in the Roland SH-2 synth for the past few weeks. I've been writing a piece of music which I've released recently under the title Lost and Found. I'll put a link to that wherever you need to see links. But today we're going to have a talk about the process of me writing this piece of music. I'm going to make a separate video talking about the SH-2 specifically because I've really fallen in love with this thing to such an extent that the piece of music that I've written is composed entirely of instances of the SH-2. Every single one of these tracks that you see on screen is an SH-2, just in under a different guise, and together they've all come together to write this or create this performance. I'm going to actually talk about the performance elements a little bit later, just a very quick snippet of it to give you a flavour. That's just a tiny sample. The performance that I ended up writing with this piece extends to about 12 minutes long, and it's an evolving piece. That the electronic music that I'm writing at the moment is very evolutionary in nature. I write static parts. Any one of these parts, if we solo it, just have a listen to one of these on their own. It's doing its thing. So I've come up with, in this case, a sequence line, which is clearly arpeggiated. You can see me playing the chords there. And I come up with these sounds or these patterns that sound good together. And then over this period of rehearsal, I mush it all together to make what's ultimately going to be a piece of music that I hope I will enjoy listening to in the future. I do these things for my own benefit. I make local copies of them, turn them into MP3s, store them on my phone, and if I want to listen to the music that I'm writing at the moment as partly a quality check, is the stuff that I'm doing any good 6 months later, but also actually for my own pleasure. All of the music that I write, I want to be able to listen to. That might sound like a strange thing, but it's really important to me to be able to enjoy my own stuff. So today I'm going to walk through how these performances come together. In this particular case, I decided very early on, I'd been playing around with the Roland Cloud stuff and decided that I hadn't paid the SH-2 enough attention. It seemed like an interesting synth with some really nice sounds out of the box. So I said, right, I'm going to deep dive this synthesizer, and my personal constraint for this current project is that I'm going to write a piece of music composed entirely of instances of the SH-2. These personal constraints I do purely for fun. This is what helps to keep the music writing process fresh for me. Give yourself a different challenge, something that you've never tried before. I've never actually used this synthesizer in any music, in any context of anything that I've ever done before. So diving in with both feet, and how many instances have we got? Something like, 10 to 15 different instances of it in total. It meant that I had a very high confidence that by the end of the project I was going to know this synthesizer really well. One of the first things that I usually do when playing with the synth for the first time is browse the presets. I have absolutely no shame about using presets because it's very rare that I use the preset exactly out of the box, and over the course of coming to terms with the synth, I'm going to get to the stage where I can tweak it to my exact and precise requirements. If it so happens that a preset has a sound that I love exactly as is and I don't need to mess with it, that's totally fine. I'm going to basically exhaust my creative juices in the music writing process. Sometimes I like to create sounds, sometimes I like to create tunes. More often than not, it's a combination of the two. The most important thing, however, is that there's a fairly high bar of difficulty that I set for myself. I've talked about this recently in another video in which I spoke about the impact of AI on human life and the importance for us to really make something be difficult. If you don't feel like you've earned it, it's not going to mean very much to you. When I write a piece of music, if it's too easy, if I've used too many pre-built sequences or relied too heavily on sounds, then it just has no sense of satisfaction. And I know I have my own compass for whether or not I think the thing has been hard enough, has been difficult enough to actually give me any artistic satisfaction. This is a very strange concept. I don't understand why we are this way, but I know for a fact I'm not the only person who thinks this way. I was recently watching an interview with Rick Beato interviewing David Gilmour, when David Gilmour said pretty much exactly the same thing. He was talking about it, the challenge of writing music, and actually the challenge is the important thing. That's what gives you that sense of fulfillment. That's a very roundabout way of saying if you're going to use presets, that's absolutely fine. Just make sure that something else is difficult, that you're stretching yourself in some other direction. Patrons and channel members at my highest tier level, the project manager level, are able to download this Cubase project. So you'd be able to, if you have the SH-2, you'd be able to load up all of these presets and effectively play with this project yourself, mess around with these sounds and construct your own performances. So anyway, we start with this sound, the woozy RPG, and if I play a single note, that's what it sounds like on its own. Let's bring a perfect fifth in. So I'm just playing a C and a G, as you can see on the keyboard there. What a beautiful sound, isn't it? Just absolutely amazing. As I'm building these sounds and I'm coming to gain familiarity with them, at some point in the process, actually quite late on, I'm going to get to start writing some notes. We'll come back and have a look at these notes in a little while. But at the moment, all I'm trying to do is come up with sounds that I think that's going to work. I'm going to be able to come up with something like that. Once I've got the preset sound, I'm going to open up the editor, and actually what we've got here is very similar to what I was just playing there. Nice simple C minor chords. The inversions of the chords really matter for arpeggiators. If I play a non-inverted C major chord, there it is. And now if I play the first inversion, you're going to get a very different sounding chord, because obviously the chord is arpeggiating off that root note, and by playing the first inversion, you're basically effectively getting a different chord, even though it contains the same notes. So it's a very common technique of mine to use inversions or variations of chords when I'm building my arpeggios or sequences, or arpeggios in this case. It's actually a very straightforward synthesizer, the SH-2. It was really nice just to go back to something that was very, very basic. There's no deep advanced screens with this one. What you see is pretty much what you get. A 2-oscillator analog synthesizer that just sounds absolutely bloody marvelous. The one kind of really special aspect to this particular synth was the scatter options in the arpeggiator. Effectively, every different scatter type in combination with the scatter depth randomizes the notes that you play. Let's just nip back briefly to that arpeggio we were listening to earlier and have another look at it. So as you can see, we have values set for scatter type and scatter depth, which means when I play that chord, let's play a C minor. That's doing something much more than the simple up. We're not just getting C, D sharp, G, C, D sharp, G. We're getting something very different. It's supposed to be E flat, isn't it? And that's all coming from these scatter options. This is the great stuff about using this constraint of writing a piece of music with a single instrument. Over the course of browsing the presets and just getting to grips with the synth itself, you're going to learn pretty much every feature there is to know, or certainly all of the interesting stuff that's going to help you, give you creative juice for writing your piece of music. So anyway, eventually we're going to come up with a decent sound, and I'll move on to part number 2. This is a new arpeggio, is it? Yeah, this is another arpeggio. Now in my notes for this sound, this is Cubase arpeggio. You probably won't be able to see this, but I'll scan this in, but it says there Tangerine Dream at 30. If I bring this one down, we're at 36 already, but if I play a nice low chord, that's right out of the Phaedra Rubicon playbook. Early 70s Tangerine Dream used these really fantastic, bring a bit of resin. Yeah, that's just an absolutely glorious sound. But as you bring the cutoff out, you're doing this kind of stuff. So it could be as early as the second pattern. When I'm throwing stuff down into the sequencer at the moment, or in the initial stages, I'm just coming out with a palette of ideas, browsing the presets and chucking these things in. And I'm doing a sort of matrix of sounds where I combine different sounds together. We have a look in this particular mix. This is just something I literally threw together before I started recording this video. I've just pulled up 5 of the faders, so we're hearing those sounds. I bring 2 of them back down again and pan those 2 presets that we've already heard. I just pan them left and right. I try to make sure that everything works with everything else. That's not always the case, and particularly with the melody lines. There are 2 melodies in this piece, octave lead and softly forward, are the 2 explicitly melodic lines. You can see them extending over, what's that, 16 bars. They never play together, don't have those 2 melodies running together, but for the most part I try to make sure that everything else does mix. If I write a piece of music where I'm using tension notes or avoid notes, then I'm going to write down where those things are. If I'm playing like sixths in a minor scale, for instance, that's a difficult note and it's challenging to make it sound good in a harmonic context. And so I'd need to know where those things are so that if I'm writing other parts on top of them, then it's not going to clash too much. For the most part, this piece of music's written with relatively straightforward, relatively simple harmonic ideas. So they mix and match together really well. Let's pick a completely random set of sounds. I'll just put that one and that one and that one. Let's see what those 3 things sound like together. Yeah, I pretty much know that everything is going to work with everything else because it's been designed that way. So where am I going to get my interest? Well, I'm going to get it from 2 different perspectives. One, finding really nice combinations of sounds that, yes, okay, everything does work with everything else, but some things work better together. That's the first thing. So again, this is going to be where these notes come in. I'm writing down in these notes interesting things. So for instance, in the woozy arpeggio, let's get back to that one again. I've written big move. What that means is when I'm doing a cut-off sweep, if I pull that cut-off down quickly, you get the wonderful delay bounce of that note kind of hanging around in the ether. I'm listening for stuff that this preset does well. Sometimes it's important to just lean on the sound and play very few notes indeed. In this particular sounds case, I have C's and D sharps, and as you can see, an incredibly simple pattern. So I'm really relying on that delay bounce. I don't know if this came straight out of the preset or if I dialed it in. I think I dialed this one in myself. We've just got that little variation at the end of the bar. That's enough. That's the kind of stuff when you're writing sounds like that you do kind of need other stuff ticking along in the background, because on its own it sounds a bit boring, a bit uninteresting. So by this stage, let's say I've written them in this linear order. I actually didn't, but it doesn't matter. If I come across a sound and I'm messing around trying to find a pattern for it, in the case of this particular sound, open ninth, I remember distinctly that I just couldn't find, after maybe an hour of attempt, which is more than I would normally give a single sound. If I'm struggling that hard with it, I'll throw it away. But I knew there was something good in this sound and I couldn't find it. So I thought to myself, I wonder if I'm just being overly complicated. Is this one of those things that needs to be churning away in the background and letting other stuff tinkle over the top? And in the end, it turned out to be exactly the case. This is one of the more important sounds in the piece, despite the fact that it's really simple, because everything works over the top of it really, really well. add too many notes to the open ninth, it stops working, it becomes too cluttered. So simple very often is best, particularly in this kind of multi-layered approach where you're using so many different sounds. Let's have a quick look at the structure of what I've got going on here. It's actually on a perpetual loop. The cycle is an intrinsic part of the performance. I don't normally write music this way. I normally take a copy of the entire thing and duplicate it many times off into the distance, maybe 20 minutes off into the distance, because ordinarily I output my performances, whatever I'm doing, I record them as an audio track inside Cubase. The only reason I didn't do that in this particular project is because I forgot. I would like to come up with some really highfalutin reason why I didn't use my standard methodology. I just plain forgot to record the audio tracks. I've actually had to create my MP3s and WAVs out of the video output that I sent from OBS, which is fine. You know, it's recorded at high enough quality that I can get away with it. But ordinarily, I'd send the thing off into infinity with these multi-part pieces, and I'll route the output back into an audio track, and then I can record that audio track in Cubase. Anyway, so we've got to this stage where I've written all of these parts, and I've thrown probably more away than I've kept. I might have written 25 or 30 tracks or tried different sounds as I'm building this thing, and I'll come back the following day, listen to what I did the previous day, may have created 2 or 3 new parts, and it might be that they were all rubbish and they all just get thrown away. But eventually I'm going to distill it down to this list of, I like all of these sounds, now let's figure out how they hang together. And this, at the moment, is where I'm deriving more pleasure from the music composition process than any other part of the process. These performances are great fun. I love getting to the stage where I've finished writing all of the music and now it's time to put it together as a piece. I deliberately decided to use no automation in this project whatsoever. There are no automated filter sweeps or volume curves in this track at all. The entire thing is manual. That means that every time I press play for the next 10, 12 minutes, however long it is, I am fully engaged. I have to close the door, make sure I've got no distractions, turn the phone off. I am absolutely 100% engaged in the thing, to the extent that I very often forget notes that I've written myself. Many of these notes that I've written myself, there's stuff in here that just doesn't get used because I'm concentrating so hard, or I suppose trying to vibe out. I'm listening to the music as much as possible and trying to kind of hear where I'm at, because the entire thing is organic. I'm having to work out on the fly, how does it sound good and what can I do right now to make it as good as possible. Well, you can't do that in one go. I ended up recording 6 versions. Now, I don't start recording versions, by which I mean outputting to OBS and ordinarily writing to an audio file, although I forgot this time. I normally only start that process when I think there's the remotest chance that what I'm going to come up with is going to sound great. It's going to sound good enough for me to want to listen to in the future. Well, in order to get there, I might have rehearsed 10, 15, 20 times over the course of a week. That might sound tedious. It absolutely isn't. I love doing it. This is great fun. This is a little bit like jamming with yourself, because you've got all of these great sounds and putting them together and coming up with cool ways to have them interact. It's just marvelous fun. And the more I'm doing it, the more I'm enjoying it. So anyway, I've got to the stage where I've pressed record, I've sent it out to OBS, I've done my 12-minute performance. I get to the end and press stop, and then there's a review process where you think, okay, that was good, but there was that filter sweep that I did on that sound sounded a bit rubbish. Those 2 sounds ended up not working together in that particular context. I forgot to unmute a part that I wanted to hear. I might have it kind of, the song might be approaching the melody line and I've inadvertently muted them both. So I think I'm going to start hearing the melody, and then it turns out that I'm not. And that's enough to throw you off, that you think, well, I can't recover now. I've kind of lost the vibe. Press stop and abandon the thing. I also try reasonably hard not to fall into the trap of doing exactly the same thing every time, sometimes more successful than others. The 6 performances that I did for this piece were more similar than I would have liked them to have been, But that's largely because I was kind of vibing out on what I was doing, and they were fairly subtle changes that I wanted to make in the end. I do think I've left a little bit of joy on the table there. When you throw wild combinations of stuff together, sometimes it's an absolute train wreck and ruins your performance. But sometimes you can kind of inadvertently stumble into something that sounds absolutely brilliant. So I do like to try to push that envelope. But like I'm saying, when you're really absolutely maxed out, when your brain's operating as fast as it possibly can, sometimes you don't have the opportunity to sit back and say to yourself, well, what new creative wonders am I going to work? I'm just basically working as hard as I can to keep it sounding at this level. There is also a trade-off, of course, over the course of maybe 1 to 2 weeks. You're going to get to the stage where, yeah, I don't really want to do that many more performances. I'm going to need to wrap this up soon. I think it's highly unlikely that writing a piece of music like this, I would put it down and come back to it another time, because it's the freshness and the kind of inspiration that you have in that moment that really feeds into it. It's highly unlikely that I'm ever going to open one of these projects up again and do a brand new remix, because it's served its purpose. I've really got to know and understand the SH-2, and I've fallen pretty deeply in love with it. I've had a great time writing the piece of music. I've now got a thing that I'm going to listen to in the future, and hopefully I'll find out in 6 months' time whether or not it's actually any good. But I think it is. I enjoy listening to it at the moment. So it's time to put this one to bed and move on to the next project. Anyway, that's Lost and Found Decomposition for you. Hope you enjoyed it today. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much for watching.